Hello, Matt Sperling here. Wanted to do a quick deck breakdown, deck tuning summary, sort of talk through some of my choices about the Talion cEDH deck that I recently used in a tournament to make top four. Um, this is less about me being 100% sure that I'm right about these choices, more about how I arrived at them, how I'm thinking about when to put a card in, when to take a card out, and just to sort of get a conversation going. And I've also received a lot of questions about what about this card, what's going on here, why that card. And rather than spend all my time answering questions one off, figured I'd sort of talk through some of the philosophy, some of the specific choices. And the other question I've gotten is, are you part of the Discord server dedicated to Talion different decks I've played? I've gotten that same question. I've tended to play a different deck in every tournament I've played so far in cEDH, so I don't really feel super excited about joining deck-specific servers, but if the folks from, I don't know if there's the Italian server or multiple, or if that just started a flame war, but if folks from that Discord or those Discords wanted to sort of have a Q&A with me or ask me anything, I'd be happy to set that up and sort of answer questions about how I think about the commander, what I like about it, don't like, how I build. But for today, I'm just going to share some of that insight in a different format. I'm going to try to start with, well, here's the list. I'm going to post the Moxfield link in the comments. You can also find it on my Twitter, @sickofit. And we're going to go through, I'm not going to cover a lot of what cards in the deck that are just in the normal Talion list that you see. So you're not going to see me discussing Thassa's Oracle or even, cards like, I don't know, Praetor's Grasp, or there's a lot of cards, or Shieldred, a card that goes well in this type of deck. More, I'm going to go with choices that I haven't seen elsewhere. Just not that they never existed, but those are more interesting for me to discuss, I think. So I'll start with sort of talking about what's the extremely popular card strategy. What's going on in the metagame that would influence my decision on what I'm going to do with my deck list. I think that's, choices exist in context. Every now and then you're including a card just on the raw power level of the card, and I got some of those in the deck too. And I want to talk about how I'm reacting to what other people are playing. So that when the One Ring has become as popular as it is in cEDH, how do I deal with that within the Italian strategy specifically, with any blue deck specifically? Well, a card that goes way up in value as a result for me and is now one of the most underplayed cards in cEDH in my view is Copy Artifact. A card that actually has a really high floor, because very often you can just get a Talisman, a Signet, a Soul Ring, a Mana Crypt. How often is that going to be available to you? Very often. So a high floor, and while like an extra Signet, it's not amazing. Remember, that's the floor of the card. And then the One Ring is bringing the ceiling up quite a bit. Every now and then you might snag a Bolus of Citadel or something crazier, but the One Ring is going in so many different decks. I don't want to say almost every deck, but a high percentage of decks have the One Ring. A high percentage of your games, as a result, someone's gonna grab one. And if you're following up their One Ring with a Copy Artifact, it's gonna be a pretty powerful play. So that means that this card is now high floor, high ceiling. That's what I'm looking for. It's a blue card. It's cheap. Yeah, I'm into Copy Artifact, and it was good for me in the tournament. I never copied One Ring, but grabbed a Mana Crypt, went to work. Extremely popular card strategy. So here we have Tymna Kraum being one of the most popular archetypes, if not the most popular archetype, and then other Tymna decks as well. Even I saw maybe three or four decks that were Tymna X that weren't Tymna Kraum. So a lot of Tymna, a lot of white decks in general. Esper Sentinel being very popular. And then also you have decks like Kinnan and its associated Mana Dorks and Orcish Bowmasters. Card that goes way up in value, for me it was Massacre for this tournament. A card that I think should be on your radar in any black deck, especially in a controlling style, but especially if your commander survives Massacre. So for Talion, it became really a perfect fit. And you remember that you don't need the Bowmaster player or the Kinnan player to have the planes in play. And I wouldn't expect a Kinnan player to have many planes in play. Anybody at the table that's not you can trigger. And also it means that if you're at one of those tables, maybe you're at like double Kinnan or something where there happens to not be a white deck, it's not a complete disaster to have to pay the iron price, the 2 black for Massacre. Yeah, it's one more than you'd pay for your Deluge, but depending on how the game's going, that might be worth it. And obviously when you get to do it for free, Free is the right price in cEDH. So it's something that it's going to be awesome. It has been awesome for me, and I strongly recommend it. And take a look at it in other black decks. Maybe less powerful in like a Rog side where it's going to kill your own commander or some other black deck, but worth a look. And think about, am I putting out creatures that are going to die to it often? How often am I tutoring for a sweeper? It would be nice to have an extra one. Do I really need to kill some things that it doesn't kill, like Dranith? Well, maybe I'm a little bit less likely to include it, but here it's a clear include for me. Now, thinking about the power level of creatures in general, that influenced me in a number of ways. I mean, there are on top you have creatures that, you know, it's and well, oh here I'm sort of bearing the lead here. So Stern Scolding is the card that is going to apply to only a subset of the creatures, but happens to be some of the most powerful ones. And then you have Subtlety, and then any counterspell that counters creatures, not just non-creatures, like Arcane Denial is the one I chose. These cards are going to go up in value when you have a lot of people running around with these types of tools, which I found to be the case. Because these are not just creatures that I have on the screen here. These are not just your value creatures where they're going to play them, okay, no big deal. They sit around for a while. Maybe someone's going to use removal on them. Maybe you don't need to. Like, these are, you're going to want to counter it a lot of the time. And so, if you know, having one of these versus not having one can really make a big difference. And even if you draw 12 cards and the game's going really well for you, whether you have one of these and whether you don't could be a big difference between one 12-card hand and another 12-card hand. And Subtlety, especially at free, again, free is the right price. So there's a real premium on that type of effect, even though it's not maybe the most powerful Magic card in a vacuum. I found it to be quite good. And as to, you know, Arcane Denial versus something like Mana Drain, which was, again, thinking about raw power level, I've found that blue is just like a pretty tough mana cost to justify. It's just a lot easier to find blue and one, whether that's coming from a swamp or swamp-like source, or it's coming from your Chrome Mox with Black Card Imprint, or it's coming from your, you know, Mana Rock that only makes colorless, whether that's a Soul Ring, a Mana Crypt, a Thought Vessel. Well, it's just, those things add up, and the Mana Drain mana is nice, no question. I'm just not keen on, you know, having it rot and having to have like blue, and two colorless, or blue, black, and that meaning only one counterspell instead of two. Whereas if I got Arcane Denial and Flusterstorm and I got blue, black, you understand there's a key difference there. So Arcane Denial was good. And then Arcane Denial versus Delay. Delay has some benefits. I mean, getting something like a Dockside out of the, you know, reach of the opponent, including the graveyard, can be very helpful against something like Breach. It's not like Arcane Denial is way ahead of Delay. It might not even be ahead of Delay, but I chose it because I do think in general it's an underrated card. Well, that's not why I chose it, but in general it's an underrated card, and the reason I chose it, you know, 2 cards for you, 1 card for me is not a bad deal in a 4-player game. I mean, if you would you take that deal in a vacuum? I mean, a lot of the time you would, especially if you get to sort of be a little bit discerning about who gets the 2 cards. I mean, you think about it this way, like every turn cycle, the table draws 3 cards, you draw 1. So you draw 2, I draw 1 is already sort of ahead of par in terms of that type of card advantage equation. And then also, like, just in general, like, I help you and I help myself a little bit, usually pretty good. So there's some benefits there. And then Arcane Denial also has like floor modes that other counters don't have. Play my excess Mox Diamond on turn million, Arcane Denial, I'm going to draw 3 cards next turn. When it's top deck war, that could matter. Play my spell, opponent counters it. I Arcane Denial my spell, because I didn't care that much about my spell, but I need more cards. Like, you can draw 3 cards that way. So it has some cool things that it does. I think the card's worth a try, worth a look if it's not on your radar. In addition to it being strong in the metagame, with the metagame dynamics that we're talking about. Other things that deal with creatures, I don't have a slide for this, but I like Pongify and the Frog Lizard Pongify, what's it called? Anyways, the Simic style one. But it's they're both 1 blue. They nuke a creature and the controller gets 3/3. I like 1 mana, 0 and 1 I've Slaughter Pact. Again, like thinking about 0 and 1 being really meaningfully different at the removal cost or counter cost versus 2, 3, and more. And also like not wanting to up my converted mana cost in an ad nauseam deck with Deadly Rollick. You know, I find those tools to be pretty effective. Again, thinking about how important creatures are and how we're going to react to that. Okay, now switching from sort of metagame decks, what about the limitations of my own commander? So I want to think about what are the strengths and weaknesses of the commander I've chosen. How does that impact what cards I put in my deck? Even though like it's not the exercise is not all about your commander. Sometimes it's about what are the most powerful Dimir cards, just in my color identity, but then it's also sometimes is about understanding what your commander does. I've already talked about Massacre, how this survives that, but there's other cards as well. I'm not going to talk about some that you typically, like, Yahenni's expertise might be in the stock Talion list. Okay, I got that too. But Defense Grid and Snapback are sort of, it's not immediately intuitive why these would be good with Talion, but when you get into the weeds, if you try to use the Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation combo with Talion in play, if anybody can trigger your Talion while your library is empty, but before the Thassa's Oracle trigger has resolved, and you might need to rewind that and play it again if it didn't make sense, but you're going to put Thassa's Oracle on in play, it's going to trigger, you're going to Demonic Consultation in response to the trigger typically, and then the opponent is going to have a window, however you order it, in between library being emptied and Thassa's Oracle winning the game, where they can trigger Talion, force you to draw a card, and you're going to lose. Laboratory Maniac doesn't quite work that way, but Thassa's Oracle does. Defense Grid will prevent them from being able to play a spell if they have fewer than 3 mana. If they have 3 mana, well, if they can find one with the right cost that has an alternate cost, maybe, maybe not. And then Snapback will let you, without spending mana, in these situations where you just have access to a huge chunk of your deck, Snapback will be great. Pick up my Talion right before I win. That's important. So just use these tools in lines where you're gonna win. It's just a matter of how. Find these, and then these are also just can obviously be general purpose tools. I mean, I had the Defense Grid Transmute Artifact package. I find quite nice. It gives you more ways to actually close the game out when you've got one of your draw engines and your commander is one. Online, in play, you've got all this stuff going, but you know, it's hard to fight through what other folks have. These cards help in the Snapback, just like free card when that's and Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel, even an even more sort of crystallized version of that concept. How do I maximize my equity in games where I'm drawing huge hands with multiple card draw engines, or just Talion, or just Ristic Study, or Ristic Study and Talion, whatever cards that you're often putting in play, often tutoring for, whatever. So it's if you're coming from 1v1, it's a little bit weird, again, a little bit counterintuitive to try to maximize your win percentage in games when things are going pretty well. In Commander and in cEDH, that actually becomes really important. And if you haven't thought about it this way, you ought to slow down and think about it this way. You're not going to win half your games or 2/3 of your games in the long run. You're going to win some smaller portion because there's 4 players sitting down at the table. So actually having things that go well early, snowball and build and not erode in terms of the advantage, and converting those advantages into wins becomes really important. You don't actually care all that much about capturing your maximum equity when you've mulled a 4 and then your opponent counters your first spell. Just sit there, take the loss, and realize you don't have to win every round in cEDH, right? Whereas if you can capture those early start, you mulligan to a fast start, capture all the equity provided by that fast start, by that card draw engine. Having a 13 card hand, a lot of times someone else at the table has got an 8 card hand. You're not guaranteed to win. Like, what are the tools we can use to try to maximize those? Things are going well, and I'm going to convert this into a victory, and that's what's going to propel me forward in a tournament setting. Blast Zone, thinking about your color identity and just your commander in general, like blue-black sort of famously not very good at dealing with non-creature permanents. Thinking about, can I use the mana base in a way where, okay, you can play a lot of people play Emergent Zone. A lot of people play, you know, there's other lands or colors that have utility. I'm trying to think of another one. There's Emergent Zone, there's Command Beacon, there's all kinds you could play. You want to pick the ones, I picked Reliquary Tower and Blast Zone, trying to think about what my commander's doing, what my color identity is going. And Emergent Zone, also your commander gives you access to Born Upon a Wind, so if you have access to a similar tool to Emergent Zone, maybe you don't need a redundant copy, you can get a Blast Zone, maybe you have a chance of blowing up, you know, some rule of law effect that would otherwise be pretty annoying to get rid of, especially if one of the blue players didn't want you to get rid of it. So think about, again, food for thought when you're making these choices about, hey, there's 10 different colorless producing lands I could imagine playing. Which one am I actually going to play? All right. So those are some of the specific card choices I want to talk through. Let me go back to the list and see if there's anything I want to talk about in general or sort of other dynamics that I might have missed. I mean, this is an ad nauseum deck, so I ought to talk about that the stock list that I encountered, and this is just on Google, sort of looking at different lists and which ones have the most likes or whatever. not an ad nauseam list, and so you get to that unlocks some benefits. You get to play stuff like misdirection and whatever else that's high mana cost. If you want to put a bribery in your deck, like, it might be okay. But when you're ad nauseum, it's hard to put stuff like bribery and misdirection in your deck. So there's a cost you pay in terms of how the rest of your deck is constructed. It makes it more painful to play a misdirection, to play a deadly rollick. But in exchange for that, you get, the best thing to put 5 mana into, essentially, in cEDH. And the fact that it plays at instant speed does, in my experience, align with your overall strategy in the deck, which is sort of reactive. Sometimes win over the top. Sometimes you just wait and see. Like, I've just liked how it plays. I think it gives your ritual effects more to do after your commander's already out. I mean, the Dark Ritual's already great when you don't have your commander out, but even you're going to draw it later. It just gives you a play dynamic that I really like. So I've liked that. I've enjoyed that. I already mentioned the Transmute package. You can also get One Ring with it. You can get Imposter Mech with it. So that's worthy of talking about too. I already like Imposter Mech more than Phantasmal Image in a deck without Dockside in it, because every time I'm copying a Dockside, I'm looking around the table for the Dockside. So Imposter Mech will do the job. But also, I can bounce my own Imposter Mech, whether that's with Chain of Vapor, or my commander happens to be big enough to crew Imposter Mech. It makes it I can snap that, and that's going to be really powerful if it is a Dockside, or sometimes even if it's something else. So I've really liked Imposter Mech, and then Transmute Artifact becoming a clone. These things work together. You obviously have Talismans. You can convert Transmute into a tutor. You have Defense Grid, which is really important because they have to prepare for you to maybe get Defense Grid when you cast Transmute Artifact, and if they don't realize that, or they forget, or they don't understand what's going on, you can just stick Defense Grid out, and it might be too late for them at that point to use their Fierce Guardianship or Force of Will or whatever. So think about that package for this archetype. Stuff like Dauthi Voidwalker, not an auto include, but I've heard like, well, wait, isn't that inconsistent with Mnemonic Betrayal? Because you're gonna, if you've got Dauthi out and it's loading up, I mean, you're usually pretty happy with that. And yeah, it makes Meme Bet a little bit worse, but I haven't found that to be a problem. I mean, both those cards are independently so strong when they're doing their thing that I'm okay if I've got the Dauthi out, other folks are feeding it, and I'm gonna sort of keep them under control with it. And then later on, I might get a Demonic Tutor or an Ad Nauseam. I mean, those are pretty common occurrences, actually, if you've got that thing going. What else? I mean, I think that's the long... I got a question from someone about Windfall versus Time Twister. I actually think, like, in a vacuum, Windfall is probably slightly ahead of Twister, in my view, in terms of just, like, the raw power level. There's oftentimes big hands. It's easier to combo with it because you sort of control the timing, and then it keeps the graveyards intact. And I just like that. And in this deck in particular, it's just going to give you some winning lines that wouldn't necessarily be available. I mean, Time Twister has some benefits too. The fact that it becomes a way to get back something that's gone that you don't necessarily have otherwise. But I think with like Praetor's Grasp and other tools, I think you have enough sort of access to stuff. Like if your Thoracle dies, like I think it's easy enough to find another one usually. Or you have Lab Maniac for some redundancy. And then stuff like Lab Maniac itself, like Windfall and Lab Maniac can kill somebody. Shieldred and Bowmasters can get really big and actually kill the entire table when you have Windfall and a huge hand. So those winning lines open up. I just like it a little bit better than Time Twister. I don't think it's miles ahead, but I think it's slightly stronger. In the lands, River of Tears, a land that's not on a lot of people's radar, but I think does a pretty cool thing where things that you're doing on your turn, like, for example, Dauthi Voidwalker, for example, Praetor's Grasp. I mean, it's going to help you. Yahenni's Expertise is going to help you with those double black requirements. And then, of course, like most of your instants are blue, so it's going to help you with that blue on other people's turns. Once it's been in play for a turn cycle, you have control. If you have a land in your hand, you have control over blue or black on your turn. So you can sort of tap it before you play land or after. I find it to be a pretty good... You're pretty hungry for good duels that come in untapped, and I think that's good enough. And I would play it over any of the ones that sometimes come in tapped, whether that's because you have 2 or fewer other lands or you have more than 2 other lands. I think those are too weak in cEDH if you can avoid it in any way. I'm not playing. I mean, whatever. That's probably all that's interesting about the lands. But all right. Other questions? Let me know. Again, folks who maybe run a Talion Discord want to organize an AMA. I'm down for that. Had a lot of fun with Talion. The Fishbowl 3 event was great. Shout out to Alex Hire for organizing that. And thanks for watching today. Appreciate it as always.